Good morning. I guess I don't have to whisper. This book, chapter 10. Here we go. And the question for this chapter is God Christian? Section 1. Bishop Desmond Tutu, one of the most respected religious leaders in the world, is known primarily for his work in South Africa to end apartheid, known as apartness. South Africa's bungled and painful attempt to resolve racial tension. After apartheid was abolished, Tutu headed the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions to bring healing among racial groups. Although Tutu is an Anglican bishop, his most recent thinking shows that he has real doubts about whether Christianity is true for all people, at all times, and in all cultures. In God is Not a Christian, he writes, "The accidents of birth and geography determine to a very large extent what faith we belong. Perhaps we should not succumb too easily to the temptation to exclusiveness and dogmatic claims to a monopoly of the truth of our particular faith. You could so easily have been an adherent of the faith that you are now denigrating, but for the fact that you were born here rather than there." In other words, Tutu is saying that because people can't help which religion they were raised in, we cannot say it would be better for them to be Christian instead of the way they were raised. By using such words as exclusiveness and dogmatic and monopoly, Tutu implies that to believe otherwise is unthinking, rude, and perhaps even cruel. For many, Tutu's insight is self-evidently true. A person growing up in Thailand is likely to be Buddhist and would therefore reject the idea of a personal creator. But does this mean that no such personal creator exists, or that his existence depends on our understanding? And if he does in fact exist, are all people in all cultures at all times bound to acknowledge and respond to him? These questions are not to be taken lightly, nor are the concerns of such a respected figure as Bishop Tutu. In this chapter, we'll explore whether it's reasonable to believe that God, as he is described in the Bible, actually exists. We'll ask, can we know that he is more than just a human invention, born out of cultural and environmental forces? Is there sufficient evidence for the God of the Bible available to those who seek it? The Bible suggests that God has revealed himself in a way that goes beyond our cultural biases and perspectives, but many people resist understanding. They raise objections such as, if God made everything, who made God? Why do we need God when unbelievers can live just as moral lives as believers, or even better? Isn't religious truth just a cultural preference? In this chapter, we'll take a look at some of the evidence for God's existence, and then we'll examine each of these objections in turn to see whether it is reasonable to deny God's existence as he is revealed in the Bible. Evidence of God is clearly seen. The Bible says that certain things about God can be known outside of the Bible through general revelation. Had that word before. Which refers to ways God has made himself known through creation. It includes, God is great in power. He is deity. This is from Romans 1:19 through 20. And it says, what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Also, God is a designer. This comes from Psalm 19:1, where it speaks of his universal craftsmanship. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. God has written his law on our hearts. This comes from Romans 2:14 through 15, and it says, when Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves. Even though they do not have the law, they show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. As Bruce Damaris says, while not imparting truths necessary for salvation, such as the Trinity, the Incarnation, or the Atonement, general revelation conveys the conviction that God exists and that He is transcendent, immanent, self-sufficient, eternal, powerful, good, and a hater of evil. In other words, people who have never read a Bible can know a great deal about God, the same God who is revealed in the Bible. This makes the argument that it is culturally insensitive to speak of God as being both real and really important less than convincing. No one needs to be 100% certain of God's existence. Complete certainty is impossible. All it takes is good reason to believe He exists. So are there good reasons to believe there is a God? Let's begin by looking at the evidence of the physical universe. Section 3. Cosmological argument. Oh, that should ring a bell for some of you. Explaining the existence of the universe. Cosmology is the study of the order, structure, and design of the universe, not to be confused with cosmetology, which is makeup, okay? So, cosmology is the study of the order, structure, and design of the universe. There is more than one version of the cosmological argument for God, but they all say that the universe could not be without God. Everything that exists has an explanation for its existence. The universe obviously exists. The only sufficient explanation for its existence is God. Philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz, ruining that name, was an early modern proponent of the cosmological argument. His brilliance was unquestionable. The co-discoverer of calculus, Leibniz also made major contributions in physics, philosophy, probability theory, medicine, psychology, linguistics, and even geology. In addition to science, he wrote books in fields as diverse as theology and law, and wrote fluently in Latin as well as in German and French. It was Leibniz who refined the binary number system and thus prepared the way for the invention of computers, 300 years before it actually happened. Leibniz thought a lot about how we can make statements such as God exists. For such a statement to be thinkable, there must be a concept of existence with actual identifiable properties. It occurred to Leibniz that whether or not the statement God exists is true, the very fact that we can think such concepts means that something exists, as concepts are something rather than nothing. But why is there something rather than nothing? There's no reason this had to be the case. Someone must have made it happen intentionally. To be a little more detailed, the cosmological argument says that God is a necessary being, a being that exists by necessity of his own nature. The universe, on the other hand, has a contingent existence. It could have failed to exist and so needs a cause, external or outside, to itself to explain why it exists. The cosmological argument for God says that all existence has an explanation and that this explanation is God. Furthermore, in God's nature, we must find an explanation of what we know to exist. Thought, creativity, and personality exist. Therefore, God must be something more than a thoughtless, impersonal force. William Lane Craig offers a helpful analogy. Imagine that you're hiking through the woods and you come across a translucent ball lying on the forest floor. Translucent means kind of clear. You would naturally wonder how it came to be there. If one of your hiking partners said to you, "Hey, it just exists inexplicably, don't worry about it," you'd either think that he was crazy or figure that he just wanted you to keep moving. No one would take seriously the suggestion that the ball existed there with literally no explanation. Now suppose you increase the size of the ball in this story so that it's the size of a car. That wouldn't do anything to satisfy or remove the demand for an explanation. Suppose it were the size of a house. Same problem. Suppose it were the size of a continent or a planet. Same problem. Suppose it were the size of the entire universe. Same problem. Merely increasing the size of the ball does nothing to affect the need of an explanation. The universe needs an explanation. Christians say that the explanation must be outside of the universe itself because things can't cause themselves to come into being. The cosmological argument says that the universe exists, that everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, and that the explanation of the universe's existence is God. The cosmological argument says that only God's existence can explain why there is something rather than nothing. 4. Kalam cosmological argument, explaining the cause of the universe. So Kalam is a cue that this is from Islam. Some of you will remember this, some of you won't. The Kalam cosmological argument was developed by Islamic philosophers in the 12th century who sought to explain how they could know about the supernatural when our tools of understanding seem to work only inside of nature. The argument says that whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, so therefore it must have a cause, and that cause is God. When they say God, they mean Allah, though they don't mean our God. For most of recorded history, most philosophers and scientists have believed that the universe is eternal, having no cause. It has simply always existed, they believed, just like God himself. Aristotle believed this. He thought that everything that comes into existence had to have come from something, and that if we were to go back in time, we would find that everything came from something else, all the way back. There was never a beginning to this. The universe is static and unchanging and has always been this way. In the 20th century, though, new advances made it possible to study the universe's origin from a scientific standpoint. Albert Einstein, in developing his general theory of relativity, began to realize that the universe was not static, but was either expanding or contracting. If it was doing either of these things, it would point strongly to a moment in time in which the universe actually began. Much of Einstein's thinking was affirmed by the work of astronomer Edwin Hubble, who showed that galaxies are moving farther away from Earth, and that the farther they are from Earth, the faster they're moving. This is known as Hubble's law, which he discovered through the phenomenon of redshift, in which the light from an object moves toward the red end of the color spectrum as it moves away from us, and its wavelengths lengthen. The implication that the universe is expanding led to the development of what we call the Big Bang theory. Think of an expanding balloon and then think of what its expansion would look like played in reverse. At some point, it had to have started expanding. The expanding universe, played backwards, leads to the same conclusion, except scientists think that at its earliest moment it was much, much smaller and way more energy-filled than a balloon. Many Christians view the Big Bang as hostile to Christianity, but others are more accepting. Christian apologist Frank Turek, for example, says, "I don't have a problem with the Big Bang because I know who banged it." Interestingly, the famous atheist philosopher Anthony Flew, who became a theist later in life, so he started not believing in God and then he started believing in a God. He became a theist later in life, said it was his understanding of the Big Bang that made him realize that the universe probably had a beginning, and that if it had a beginning, it probably had a cause. God. Here's how Flew phrased it. When I first met the Big Bang theory as an atheist, it seemed to me the theory made a big difference because it suggested that the universe had a beginning, and that the first sentence in Genesis, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," was related to an event in the universe. As long as the universe could be comfortably thought to be not only without end, but also without beginning, it remained easy to see its existence and its most fundamental features as brute facts. And if there had been no reason to think the universe had a beginning, there would be no need to postulate something else that produced the whole thing. But the Big Bang Theory changed all that. If the universe had a beginning, it becomes entirely sensible, almost inevitable to ask what produced this beginning. Truly, virtually every scientist, or at least almost every physicist, believes that the universe had a beginning. The Kalam cosmological argument builds on this understanding and speculates about what brought the universe into existence. Here's how the argument goes, as Craig states it. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. The claim whatever begins to exist has a cause seems pretty solid. After all, it's self-evident that physical objects don't just pop into existence without a cause. If they did, we wouldn't be able to conduct successful scientific experiments because we would never know whether our experiment or some random factor caused the effects we observe. It's also clear that nothing can cause itself to begin to exist. In order to do that, it would have to exist before it existed. There are, of course, people who deny that everything that begins has a cause, but they have to pay a high rational price for this belief. They are denying the logic we use to make sense of the material universe. The second premise, the universe began to exist, rests on solid ground as well. Einstein's general theory of relativity, that the universe isn't static, and Hubble's redshift, which is that galaxies are all moving away from each other in every direction, offer evidence for it. Moreover, as J.P. Moreland observes, there is evidence from the second law of thermodynamics, which, in one form, states that the amount of useful energy in the universe is being used up. If the universe were infinitely old, it would already have used up all its useful energy and have arrived at a temperature of absolute zero. Since there are many pockets of useful energy, for example, the sun, the universe must be finite in duration. Therefore, there was a beginning when the universe's useful energy was put into it from the outside. To be sure, such evidence doesn't prove that the Bible or Christianity is true or that Jesus is God, but it does indicate that the universe was made and that there was a maker. As authors Sean McDowell and Jonathan Morrow put it, the Kalam helps narrow the range of possible causes to a being that is non-physical, spaceless, timeless, changeless, and powerful. If matter began to exist at the moment of creation, then the matter's cause must be non-physical or spiritual. Since space itself came into existence at the Big Bang, space's cause must be spaceless. Since time began at the moment of the Big Bang, time's cause must be timeless. Since change is a product of time, time's cause must also be changeless. The amount of energy in the universe is powerful. The amount of matter in the universe is immense. The cause of this power and immensity must be immensely powerful. The Kalam cosmological argument says the cause is God. Dun dun dun. An objection to cosmological arguments. If God made the universe, who made God? You can respond to this common objection by pointing out that the cosmological argument does not claim that everything has a cause, but that everything that had a beginning had a cause. That simply doesn't apply to God, who is a necessary being and therefore without beginning. Besides that, the one who raises that objection is putting himself into a quandary. If everything needs a cause, and if there is no God, what caused the universe? To say that everything had a cause leads to an infinite cycle of cause and effect that could never have a beginning. If there never was a beginning, we could never have reached the point in which you are currently reading this sentence. There must be one eternal, uncaused causer, or nothing would have ever come into existence. Some scientists today, though, are saying that physics tells us that the universe can create itself. Stephen Hawking, whom some consider the greatest scientist alive, says that certain laws of gravity are all that's necessary for the universe to have created itself from nothing. Quantum physics shows that it's possible for particles, real atomic matter, to emerge out of a pure vacuum. The problem, though, is that a vacuum isn't really nothing, and neither are the laws of physics. It takes energy in a vacuum to produce particles, and that's not nothing. Plus, a vacuum requires space, which isn't nothing either. All of these, including the laws of physics, are as contingent. That means they depend for their existence on things they cannot themselves explain. So they are contingent as everything else in the universe. None of them could be the ultimate explanation that has to stand behind and before every contingent thing. Section 5. Woohoo! The design argument, explaining the physical order of the universe. The design argument says the world appears to be the product of design and that a designed universe requires an intelligent designer. That designer is God. One important early version of this from Thomas Aquinas takes the very simple approach of pointing out that design is apparent to everyone, everywhere, in almost everything we see. To deny that the world is designed is to deny the obvious, Aquinas said. More recently, the design argument has come up in another form, intelligent design, known as ID. Before getting to the particular evidence, it will be helpful to discuss what ID, or intelligent design, is. Perhaps William Dembski, one of ID's founders, has the best explanation. Dembski is a scientist and philosopher who holds master's degrees in statistics, mathematics, philosophy, and theology, and doctoral degrees in mathematics and philosophy. He has conducted postdoctoral research at Princeton University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. About intelligent design, Dembski asks and answers, is that radio signal from outer space just random noise or the result of an alien intelligence? Is that chunk of rock just a random chunk of rock or an arrowhead? Is Mount Rushmore the result of wind and erosion or the creative act of an artist? We ask such questions all the time, and we think we can give good answers to them. Yet when it comes to biology and cosmology, scientists balk at even raising such questions, much less answering them in favor of design. This is especially true of biology. According to well-known evolutionist Francisco Ayala, Darwin's greatest achievement was to show how the organized complexity of organisms could be attained without a designing intelligence. By contrast, intelligent design purports to find patterns in biological systems that signify intelligence. Intelligence divine therefore directly challenges Darwinism and other materialistic approaches to the origin and evolution of life. When we look around, we see things that exist, such as rocks, trees, and water. We see events occur, such as the sun rising and rain falling. We notice that some things are constant, such as the law of gravity, and given certain conditions, the point at which water freezes. What are we to make of such observations? How could they happen? First, they could be the result of law that is. They had to be this way. Second, they could be the result of chance accident. Or third, they could be the product of design. Imagine standing at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, gazing at the many eerily beautiful rock formations. You would recognize these formations as the outworking of natural laws, resulting in certain water flows and environmental conditions that erode some of the rock, leaving unusual shapes. Now imagine standing at the base of Mount Rushmore, noticing how the rock formation bears a definite resemblance to 4 U.S. presidents. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. You would immediately realize that this was not caused by erosion. Except by design, faces do not appear on mountainsides in such recognizable detail. So how can we tell whether something has resulted from law, chance, or design? Thomas Aquinas's answer would be something like, do we even need to ask if Mount Rushmore was designed? Isn't it obvious? Still, when it comes to biological systems, evolutionary scientists have asked the question anyway. According to Dembski, the test for design is specified complexity. An event exhibits specified complexity if it is contingent or dependent, and therefore not necessary. If it is complex and therefore not readily reproducible by chance, and if it is specified in the sense of exhibiting an independently given pattern. Note that a merely improbable event is not sufficient to eliminate chance. Flip a coin long enough and you'll witness a highly complex or improbable event. Even so, you'll have no reason not to attribute it to chance. The important thing about specifications is that they be objectively given and not just imposed on events after the fact. For instance, if an archer fires arrows into a wall and then we paint bull's eyes around them, we impose a pattern after the fact. On the other hand, if the targets are set up in advance or specified and then the archer hits them accurately, we know it was by design. Let's take a look at 3 ways specified complexity manifests itself: fine-tuning, the privileged planet, and biological information. Fine-tuning. The physical constants in the universe are extremely fine-tuned. Fine-tuning is not the same thing as design. It just means that if any of the variables that permit life to exist were, as Craig puts it, to be altered by a hair's breadth, the delicate balance required for the existence of life would be upset, and the universe would be life-prohibiting instead. Kind of like if the Earth were any closer to the sun, we would all be dead. Or any farther away, and we'd all freeze. Robin Collins, a professor at Messiah College, is trained in both physics and philosophy. In The Case for a Creator, Lee Strobel relates a conversation with Collins about fine-tuning. "Let's talk about gravity," Collins said. "Imagine a ruler or one of those old-fashioned linear radio dials that goes all the way across the universe. It would be broken down into 1-inch increments, which means there would be billions upon billions upon billions of inches. The entire dial represents the range of force strengths in nature, with gravity being the weakest force and the strong nuclear force that binds protons and neutrons together in the nuclei being the strongest, a whopping 10,000 billion times stronger than gravity. The range of possible settings for the force of gravity can plausibly be taken to be at least as large as the total range of force strengths. Now let's imagine that you want to move the dial from where it's currently set. Even if you were to move it only an inch, the impact on life in the universe would be catastrophic." In a different location, Collins continued, "Each of the 4 fundamental forces of nature had to be carefully fine-tuned for life: gravity, electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force. In particular, the ratio of the electromagnetic force to the gravitational force must be delicately balanced to 1 part in 1040, and then they show you the number. If the ratio varied even slightly, then our universe would not have small and large stars, which are both necessary for a planet to sustain life. How delicate a balance is this? Imagine covering 1 billion continents the size of North America with coins. Stack the coins in columns that reach to the moon. Paint 1 coin red, and place it in one of the columns. Blindfold a friend and have her attempt to pick it out. The odds are roughly 1 in 1,040 that she will. These probabilities are so infinitesimal. That's a really hard word to say. That it is very hard to imagine such things occurring by chance. In fact, if you think you can imagine them happening by chance, that means you haven't understood how small the probabilities are. Even Paul Davies, a physicist who claims not to be a Christian, says it is hard to resist the impression that the present structure of the universe, apparently so sensitive to minor alterations in numbers, has been rather carefully thought out. The seemingly miraculous concurrence of these numerical values must remain the most compelling evidence for cosmic design. The privileged planet. We seem to live on a privileged planet, according to authors Guillermo and Gonzalez and J.W. Richards. The planet itself, to paraphrase physicist Freeman Dyson, seemed to have known we were coming. As Gonzalez and Richards put it, if you were a cosmic chef, your recipe for cooking up a habitable planet would have many ingredients. You would need a rocky planet large enough to hold on to a substantial atmosphere and oceans of water, and to retain internal heat for billions of years. You would need the right kind of atmosphere. You would need a large moon to stabilize the tilt of the planet's rotation on its axis. You would need the planet to have a nearly circular orbit around a main sequence star similar to our sun. You would need to give that planet the right kind of planetary neighbors within its star system, and you would need to put that system far from the center edges and spiral arms of a galaxy like the Milky Way. You would need to cook it during a narrow window of time in the history of the universe, and so on. This is a partial list, but you get the idea. And not only is our planet fine-tuned for life, but as Gonzalez and Richards go on to say, we also seem to have been placed in an excellent location for making observations about the rest of the universe. It appears that the Creator wanted us to be discoverers. Biological information. Biological information appears to have been designed. When we look at the complexity of DNA, we see that it is full of information. Only rational minds produce information. Francis Collins, the scientist who led the team to map the human genome, delightfully explains the awesome complexity of DNA. Bacteria have DNA, yeast have DNA, so do porcupines, peaches, and people. It is the universal language of all living things. All of the DNA of an organism is called its genome, and the size of the genome is commonly expressed as the number of base pairs it contains. Think of the twisted helix of DNA as a ladder. The simplest free-living cell organisms, such as bacteria, generally pack all their information into a genome of a few million base pairs. Fancier multicellular organisms with more complex body plans require larger genomes to specify those functions. Our own genome stacks up as 3.1 billion rungs of the DNA ladder. And that's in every cell of your body. Philosopher Douglas Grudis further points out that DNA contains genetic information, an example of a specified complexity, and only intelligence, not chance, can produce such information. Because DNA isn't a product of necessity, that is, it's scientifically and logically conceivable to think of a world without it. And because DNA could not have been produced by mere chance, it is therefore reasonable to infer design. Whether we're talking about design on a very large or very small scale, the formal argument for design is the same. Design requires a designer. The universe exhibits design. Therefore, the universe was designed by an intelligent designer. 2 objections to the design argument. The multiverse would explain away fine-tuning. Scientists such as Max Tegmark and Brian Greene have proposed what they consider to be a possible solution to the incredible odds against life arising from chance processes in this universe, the multiverse theory. If there were, in fact, many universes, rather than just one, then the chances of life arising in at least one of them would seem to be much greater. Some theories in physics seem to say there might actually be a vast number of different universes, each of them with different histories and even different physical laws. But as William Lane Craig points out, in order to be scientifically credible, some plausible mechanism must be suggested for generating the many worlds. But if the many worlds hypothesis is to be successful in attributing fine-tuning to chance alone, then the mechanism that generates the many worlds had better not be fine-tuned itself, for if it is, then the problem arises all over again. How do you explain the fine-tuning of the multiverse? Not only that, but no scientist has ever proposed a way we could check and find out if those other universes actually exist. The physical theories behind them are very far from being proved, and many people are quite sure they could never be proved, at least by any science anyone can imagine. That means that multiverse theory is little more than a guess, and it almost looks like a guess that some people have made in order to avoid believing in a designer. One cosmologist said it clearly: if there is only one universe, you might have to have a fine-tuner. If you don't want God, you'd better have a multiverse. Design does not require a designer. Scientists keep on proposing new theories, attempting to explain how things that appear to be designed could have arisen by chance processes. But multiverse theory makes assumptions about the world and about information that are reasonable only if, in fact, things that appear to be designed and actually are. The other major objection to the design argument comes through evolutionary theory. In his 1996 book, The Blind Watchmaker, Why the Evidence of Evolution Reveals a Universe Without Design, famed atheist Richard Dawkins admits that everything in biology appears designed, but he says that whether something appears designed is something we can ascertain only after the fact, like detectives coming upon a crime scene. Yet every time Dawkins attempts his own detective work, which is namely to prove that such design could have emerged from natural selection and random mutations, he does so as advocate for intelligent design. He does so as advocate. This is a weird sentence. He does so as advocate for intelligent design, Stephen Meyer points out, by smuggling in the guiding hand of an intelligent agent. For example, explanation. When Dawkins tries to show that a computer program could randomly come up with a phrase from Shakespeare, he ignores the fact that he himself has designed the program and that the statement the program arrived at is a meaningful one. Dawkins, in effect, accuses creationists of stacking the deck by stacking the deck himself. Evolutionary theory still faces formidable obstacles, however, in explaining the specified complexity found in living things everywhere. It has not yet actually shown in any detail either how one species can evolve into another, more complex one. Evolutionary theorists assume it must happen, but after decades of work, they have never shown that it does or how it could. Maybe she'll stop there for a moment.